My grandson called at 5 a.m. and said, "Grandma, don't wear your red coat today." His voice trembled. Hours later, I froze in place the moment I saw what was folding there. Before I tell you what happened next, if you're watching this, please hit subscribe to her voice and tell me in the comments which part shocked you the most. My grandson called at 5 that morning. The sound of the phone jolted me out of a half-sleep, the kind of fragile doze where dreams still cling to your mind like mist. When I saw Noah's name flashing on the screen, my heart stuttered. He never called that early, ever. His little voice trembled when he spoke. "Grandma, don't wear your red coat today." For a moment, I thought I was still dreaming. My mouth went dry. "What did you say, sweetheart?" I asked, trying to sound calm. He sniffed. "Just don't wear it. Promise me." There was fear in his tone, not the ordinary kind a 12-year-old might feel after a nightmare. It was sharper, real. Something inside me froze. I asked if he was okay, if his mom knew he was calling me, but he didn't answer right away. I could hear his breathing, quick and uneven. Then a whisper so faint it barely touched the line. "I just heard them talking. Please, Grandma, don't wear it." Then silence. The call ended. I sat there in the dark, the phone still pressed to my ear, the world suddenly too quiet. My red coat hung by the front door, the one I'd planned to wear that morning to the post office. It had always been my favorite, deep cranberry wool, soft as memory, warm as love. Daniel bought it for me before he died. I'd worn it every winter since. But that morning I couldn't touch it. Something about Noah's voice rooted me to the chair. It wasn't just fear, it was instinct. A kind of warning only a heart can hear. I made tea instead, watched the sun come up over the trees. My hands wouldn't stop trembling. Hours passed. I tried to shake it off. Maybe he'd had a bad dream. Maybe Claire was behind it somehow. But when the local news came on around 9, my heart nearly stopped. They were reporting an accident downtown. A woman hit just outside the post office. The anchor's voice was calm, detached. She was wearing a red coat. I remember the mug slipping from my hand, shattering against the tile. The sound echoed like thunder through my kitchen. The news kept replaying the same footage, a flash of red fabric, police tape fluttering, a few bystanders holding their hands to their mouths. I couldn't look away. My breath came in shallow pulls. I knew that street, the post office, the bakery right beside it. That's where I'd planned to go. That's where I should have been. If Noah hadn't called me, that woman could have been me. My knees gave out, and I sat on the cold kitchen floor, the shards of the broken mug glinting beside my slippers. I stared at my reflection in the tea puddle, shaking. My hands, my voice, my heartbeat, everything trembled with disbelief. I reached for the phone again, desperate to call Noah, but Claire answered instead. Her voice was tight, formal, like she was holding something back. "He's fine," she said quickly. "He's just resting. He had a bad dream last night, that's all." I tried to explain what had just happened, but she cut me off. "Grace, please don't upset him. He worries too much already." Then she hung up. I just sat there, the quiet pressing in around me, wondering what she wasn't saying. Something about her tone felt wrong, like the lie wasn't meant to protect Noah, but to protect herself. Later I went to the window. The sky was pale and cloudless, the kind of day that should have felt ordinary. But it didn't. Every sound, the chirp of the birds, the hum of a passing car, felt distant, unreal. I looked at the red coat still hanging by the door, its color glowing softly in the morning light. I reached out, touched the fabric, and pulled my hand back as if it burned. That coat wasn't just clothing anymore. It was a warning. I didn't know how Noah knew. I didn't know who that woman was. But deep down, I felt something heavy shift inside me. A quiet voice that whispered this wasn't over. I couldn't stop thinking about Noah's voice. That trembling, urgent tone haunted me like a shadow that followed even when the lights were on. By mid-morning, I found myself pacing the living room, glancing at the red coat, wondering if the day had been a warning or a premonition. I needed to know how he had known, why he had sounded so afraid. My fingers fumbled with my phone until I finally dialed his number. It rang once, twice, and then his small, hesitant voice answered, quieter than usual. "Grandma," he whispered. I swallowed hard, trying to keep calm. "Noah, honey, tell me exactly what you mean. How did you know?" There was a pause, and I could hear the weight of his thoughts pressing against the line. I heard Mom and Uncle Mark talking last night," he admitted finally, his words slipping like fragile glass. "I wasn't supposed to, but I heard them talking about the coat, about someone getting hurt." My chest tightened. "Uncle Mark? That wasn't a name I expected." My mind raced through possibilities, through the people who had access, who could even think to hurt someone. Noah sniffed, barely holding back tears. "I didn't mean to, Grandma. I had to tell you. I thought maybe it would help." His honesty, so raw and small, cut through my fear with a strange clarity. I felt the weight of responsibility settle on my shoulders. It wasn't just the accident. It was the secret my grandson had stumbled upon, a truth that no child should bear. I spoke softly, coaxing him. "Noah, it's okay. You did the right thing. You saved me." I could hear his trembling sigh of relief. Even though his words were small, they carried a strength beyond his years. I promised him I would be careful, that I would stay safe, and he finally let go of the fear he had been carrying like a secret stone in his chest. After hanging up, I sat on the edge of my bed, my hands wrapped around a cup of lukewarm tea. My mind replayed his words over and over, each fragment a thread connecting me to something I hadn't understood before. The careful watching, the hushed conversations, the danger that lingered in familiar places. Noah had seen more than anyone had realized. He had known, and he had acted, not out of courage taught in books, but from love, from instinct, from the kind of clarity only a child who trusts deeply can feel. I closed my eyes and let myself breathe slowly, feeling the tight knot in my chest loosen just a fraction. There was fear, yes, but also a quiet pride, a recognition that sometimes the smallest voices carry the heaviest truths. And in that moment, as I touched the edge of the red coat once more, I understood that this was no ordinary morning, no ordinary warning. It was a message, a lifeline, and a reminder that the people we love most sometimes know things we can't yet see. Noah had given me a gift, unknowing, pure, and necessary. He had given me clarity and the chance to act before it was too late. The realization settled over me with both weight and relief. I didn't yet know all the pieces, but I understood one thing clearly. My grandson's voice had saved me, and I would never forget it. After that morning, I couldn't stop thinking about how distant Claire had become over the years. When Daniel was alive, we had been close. We shared holidays, coffee in the mornings, laughter spilling over the kitchen table. But after he died, the warmth between us seemed to vanish, replaced by quiet coldness and polite avoidance. Claire had begun keeping Noah away from me more and more, insisting he needed space from my influence, though I could never understand why. I would pick him up from school, and she would hover nearby, tight-lipped, reminding me of curfews, rules, and schedules. At first I blamed grief, both ours and hers. But that day, hearing Noah's fearful little voice on the phone, I realized there had always been something beneath the surface. Something Claire had been shielding him from. I remembered afternoons when I would arrive at their house and the door would open just a crack, Claire's eyes cautious and assessing. "He's napping," she would say. "Maybe another time." And I would leave quietly, heart aching, feeling the distance grow between us with every small refusal. It had felt like a protective wall, and now I wondered if it had been more than that. If it had been a wall meant to keep me away from knowing things I wasn't supposed to see. Noah's warning that morning, his trembling words, made me realize just how much he had been exposed to without my knowledge, how much he had observed in the shadows of adult conversations. It made me ache for him, for the burden of understanding too much too soon. I poured myself another cup of tea, letting the steam curl around my fingers, trying to steady my racing thoughts. I thought of Daniel, his quiet humor, his patience with both his mother and his son. He would have noticed the tension, the hidden threads, the way Claire's distance had shifted from polite grief to something almost secretive. I remembered the times he would laugh at Noah's small discoveries, at the way he insisted on noticing things adults overlooked. And I realized that morning's call, the fear in Noah's voice, wasn't just about a coat. It was about information, about secrets, about the truth filtered through a child's ears. The more I thought about it, the more I understood that the accident, the red coat, and Noah's call were all connected to this growing distance, this barrier that had been quietly constructed between us. I walked slowly to the window, staring out at the street where children were biking, dogs barking, neighbors tending their gardens. Everything looked ordinary, peaceful even, but inside me I felt a tension that refused to ease. Claire had built a wall, yes, but Noah had found a way to pierce it with his small voice, his courage, his instinct. And now, for the first time in years, I felt a flicker of determination. This wasn't just about me being careful. It was about understanding the layers of distance, the hidden truths, the things Claire had tried to keep from me. I knew I needed to pay attention, to observe, to listen, just as Noah had. That child had seen the cracks. And I would too. The distance that had grown over the years didn't feel permanent anymore. It felt fragile, like glass. And I had learned that morning that fragile things can shatter if not handled carefully, or they can reveal truths you never expected. I touched the red coat lightly, my fingers lingering on its soft fabric, and I felt the first stirrings of a plan, not loud, not angry, but quiet, deliberate, and necessary. The family distance, once a wound, was now a map, and I intended to follow it carefully. By late morning, I knew I couldn't just sit and wait. I had to see for myself, had to understand what Noah had heard, what Claire was hiding. I brewed another pot of tea, the aroma calming me, and drove slowly toward their house, the tires humming softly against the quiet Asheville streets. Every turn of the wheel made my heart beat faster, anticipation and fear weaving together like an old tapestry. When I arrived, the door was closed, the mailbox slanted in the sun, and for a moment I hesitated. Claire's world had always felt like a fortress to me since Daniel's death. Walls I had respected, boundaries I hadn't crossed, but today I felt compelled to step closer, to glimpse what lay behind the careful distance. I rang the bell lightly. Footsteps approached, measured and deliberate. Claire opened the door just a crack, her eyes sharp, assessing. "Grace," she said, her tone neutral but her posture guarded. "Noah's resting." I smiled softly, nodding, holding my hands in front of me as if to show I carried no threat. "I just brought some muffins." Thought he might like a treat. She didn't move aside, didn't invite me in fully. I stepped past the threshold anyway, letting the familiar smell of coffee and faint perfume wash over me. And then I saw it, crumpled, tossed carelessly in a small trash bin by the corner of the kitchen. A flash of deep crimson fabric, almost hidden under a pile of receipts and junk mail. My breath caught. My hands went cold. I bent slightly, just enough to glimpse it clearly. The shade, the texture, It was unmistakable. My red coat. The very coat Daniel had given me. The one Noah had warned me not to wear. Part of me wanted to scream, wanted to demand answers, but I stayed still. I held my breath, letting the silence stretch, letting the fabric speak to me in the quiet language of warning. Claire continued moving about the kitchen as if nothing was out of place, chopping vegetables for lunch, humming softly, unaware of what I had noticed. Or perhaps she knew I had noticed and was pretending not to. My stomach twisted. This wasn't an accident anymore. It was deliberate, calculated, and yet it carried a kind of careless arrogance. I wondered what she had intended, what plan she thought she could hide from me and from Noah. I set the muffins on the counter, my fingers lingering on the edge, steady despite the turmoil inside me. I smiled at Noah when he peeked out from the hallway, his small face curious, nervous. He gave me a brief nod, no words, just that tremor of understanding that made my heart ache and swell at the same time. I knew he had told the truth. He had seen, he had listened, he had tried to warn me. And now I understood the magnitude of what had happened, the quiet danger that had brushed so close. I didn't confront Claire that day. I didn't need to. I left soon after, my steps measured, my mind racing with questions. The red coat wasn't just a piece of clothing anymore. It was a symbol, a signal, a warning wrapped in fabric. And for the first time in months, I felt the stirrings of purpose. Something had shifted. The distance, the secrets, the careful manipulation, all of it was beginning to unravel, and I would watch it closely, silently, until the truth revealed itself. Today I realized my instincts had been right, and that realization was the first step toward reclaiming what had been quietly threatened, my life, my memory of Daniel, and the safety of my grandson. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the sight of the crimson fabric in Claire's trash bin, the way it had gleamed like a warning in the harsh kitchen light. My mind wandered down every possible path, imagining what could have happened if Noah hadn't called, if I had stepped out that morning wearing the coat. The quiet of the house pressed in on me, every creak of the floorboards echoing like a caution I couldn't ignore. I got up to check on Noah one more time, finding his bedroom door slightly ajar. He was curled under the covers, eyes wide, still holding the small stuffed bear he carried everywhere. I sat beside him, letting him feel my presence without words. I wanted him to know he had done the right thing. He nodded faintly, his hands trembling slightly as they clutched the bear. Then, from the hallway, I heard it, a whisper so soft I almost thought I imagined it. I froze, listening. She didn't go out this morning. Thank God! The voice carried relief, and yet something else, too. Guilt. Fear. I recognized it immediately. Claire. She was talking on the phone, pacing lightly, her words clipped and careful. My stomach twisted. She was talking about me, about my morning. The slow realization sank in. She knew I had planned to go out in the red coat. She had spoken to someone else about it. Relief in her voice meant she hadn't expected me to be there, and the guilt meant she had intended for something to happen. My hands trembled as I gripped the edge of the bed, trying to steady my heartbeat, trying to keep calm. I didn't confront her then. I stayed still, letting her voice carry on, pieces of phrases floating through the air. I didn't think she'd... And Noah. She warned me. I caught just enough to piece together the outline of whatever scheme had been in motion. My grandson's intuition, his courage, had disrupted it. I felt a strange mixture of pride and sorrow. Pride that Noah had acted, that he had protected me without even fully understanding the danger. Sorrow that the person I had once trusted with my family could have allowed harm to come so close. I let the whisper fade into silence before moving back to my room, my body tense, yet strangely alert. My thoughts circled around the same conclusion. Claire's careful distance, the walls she had built, the way she had tried to control Noah's interactions. They were not just about grief or propriety. They were about hiding intentions I hadn't anticipated. I sat on the edge of the bed, tracing the fabric of the red coat in my mind, imagining its weight, its texture, the warmth it had always given me. That warmth now felt like a shield I had almost lost. I breathed slowly, letting the awareness settle, letting my mind catalog every detail, every whisper, every clue. That night, I made a silent promise to myself. I would watch carefully. I would listen. I would learn. And when the time came, I would act. Not with anger, not with loud confrontation, but with quiet precision. The whisper in the hall had spoken the truth without revealing everything, and I would uncover the rest, step by careful step. That voice, so soft and yet so telling, had given me the first real glimpse into Claire's intentions, and I knew then that the danger had been far closer than I ever could have imagined. It was a small moment of clarity, one I would carry with me as the first piece of a plan I was only beginning to understand. I needed someone I could trust, someone steady and calm, who had seen more of life than the fear that had consumed me that morning. So I called Sheriff David Hunt. He had been a friend of my late husband for decades, a man who always carried a quiet authority, the kind that didn't need loud words to command respect. When he answered, I could hear the faint creak of his office chair, the shuffle of papers. I hesitated for a moment, my fingers tightening around the phone before speaking. "David, I don't know what to do," I said softly. "It's Noah. And Claire? And the coat?" His deep voice was steady but measured. "Grace, slow down. Tell me exactly what happened." I repeated the story, from the early morning call to Noah's trembling words to the news report, to the whisper I'd overheard in the hall. I could hear him leaning back in his chair, letting the silence stretch between us, absorbing every detail. After I finished, he didn't respond right away. I felt the tension coil inside me, wondering if I had said too much or too little. Finally he spoke, voice low and careful. "Grace, you did the right thing by listening to Noah. That boy has a good instinct, and so do you. But you need to be careful. Quiet for now." His words were cautious, almost too cautious. I sensed there was something unsaid, a weight pressing behind his advice. "Quiet? David, what do you mean?" I asked, trying not to let my panic show. He hesitated and then sighed. "There are things from Daniel's death. Things I suspected but couldn't prove. People who wanted the case closed quickly. I've kept my distance, hoped for the best, but—" His voice trailed off, and the silence filled with unspoken truths. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. I understood then that he knew more than he was letting on, that he had seen the threads connecting Daniel's accident, Claire, and now, this morning. But he was careful, protective in a way that wasn't fully comforting. "I can help," I said softly. "I need to know what's real." He paused, then spoke again, softer this time. "I'll do what I can, but don't confront anyone yet. Let me gather what I can first. And Grace, trust your instincts. Always trust your instincts." I hung up, my hands trembling as I set the phone down. The weight of what I had just learned pressed heavily against my chest. Sheriff Hunt wasn't just a friend. He was someone who had the knowledge, the authority, and yet the restraint that I lacked in that moment. But I also realized that his silence, as much as it protected me, also protected Claire. It was a delicate balance, a line between danger and safety that I had never navigated before. I sat by the window, watching the sun dip lower, shadows stretching across the yard, thinking about Daniel, about Noah, about the whisper in the hall. Something was coming. I could feel it, slow and inevitable. And for the first time, I understood that quiet vigilance would be my weapon. I didn't need to confront, didn't need to shout, didn't need to break. I only needed to watch, listen, and prepare. Sheriff Hunt's silence had given me a gift, the knowledge that I wasn't alone, even if he couldn't tell me everything yet. And in that quiet, I made my own promise. I would uncover the truth, carefully, deliberately, and with the patience that the situation demanded. The first pieces were falling into place, and now I had to wait, silently, for the rest to reveal themselves. The next morning, Noah slipped a piece of paper into my hand, his small fingers brushing mine with a nervous urgency. I looked down and saw a drawing he had made, simple, almost naive, but with a clarity that made my stomach tighten. There was a tiny figure in a red coat standing beside a car with jagged lines that suggested broken glass. I recognized the street immediately, the one I would have walked down that morning if not for his warning. My hands shook as I held the drawing closer to the light, tracing the pencil lines with a finger, trying to absorb every detail. Noah's eyes were wide, filled with a mixture of fear and hope. "I didn't mean to tell," he whispered, barely audible, "but I had to. I thought maybe you'd understand." I knelt beside him, pulling him into a gentle hug, feeling the warmth of his small body against mine, the quiet tremor of his chest against my shoulder. "Sweetheart, you did exactly the right thing," I murmured. "You saved me without even knowing it." He leaned against me, and for a moment, the weight he had been carrying, the burden of overhearing, of understanding too much, seemed to lighten, even just a little. I examined the drawing again, noticing details I hadn't seen at first. A small, scribbled figure in the background, standing apart, almost watching. My mind raced. Who had been there? Who had been involved? And what exactly had Claire been planning? My grandson had witnessed more than I had realized, more than anyone had suspected. I realized then how observant and sensitive he truly was, how much he had internalized without complaint, without dramatics. And yet, he had acted, had reached out to me in that small, trembling voice that had sounded like a lifeline in the dark. I felt a surge of both pride and sorrow. Pride in the boy's courage, in the instinct that had guided him. Sorrow in the knowledge that a child had to shoulder the shadows of adult secrets. The heavy truth of danger that should have belonged only to grown-ups. I set the drawing aside gently, afraid to crease it, and looked into his eyes. "You have a gift, Noah," I whispered. "A kind of understanding that even adults don't always have. You saw, you felt, and you protected." He blinked, unsure if he had done anything special, but I could see it in his face, the flicker of understanding, the first glimmer of self-assurance that his actions mattered. Later, when I placed the drawing on the fridge, I realized it was more than just a child's sketch. It was evidence, a map, a clue. Noah had given me a way to see the danger clearly, to trace the threads that had been hidden in whispered tones and subtle hints. And in that moment, I knew that this small act, the tremor in his voice, the pencil lines on paper, had set the course for what I would need to do next. The boy's courage, quiet and unassuming, had illuminated the path that fear alone could never have revealed. I held him close once more, letting the warmth of his trust fill me, knowing that together we would face what had been lurking just beyond sight, and that the red coat, once a symbol of warning, would now be a reminder of the clarity, courage, and love that had kept us safe. After seeing Noah's drawing, I started noticing things I had overlooked before, small, subtle signs that whispered of tension and secrets tucked into corners of our everyday lives. Walking through my neighborhood that afternoon, I realized how quiet it had become, how the usual hum of children playing and neighbors chatting seemed muted, as if the world itself was holding its breath. I passed the little bakery on Oakwood Street, the one I had loved since Daniel and I first moved here. The bell above the door chimed when I entered, but the baker, Mrs. Jensen, glanced at me with an almost imperceptible frown before returning to her work. Something had shifted. I could feel it in the air, in the way the sunlight fell unevenly across the cracked sidewalk. It reminded me of the morning Noah had called, that trembling fear in his voice that had rooted me to the chair. My eyes kept darting to the red coat I had carefully hung in the hall, its color muted but still vivid in my memory. Each step I took through the streets carried the weight of that warning. I felt the tension in my chest, a slow, steady pulse, reminding me of what could have happened, of how close danger had brushed against us. As I walked past Claire's house, I noticed the curtains pulled tightly across the windows, the front door slightly ajar but unmoving, as though someone had been standing inside, watching. I slowed my pace, letting the neighborhood seem ordinary while my mind catalogued every subtle anomaly. A neighbor across the street waved at me, her smile polite but distant, eyes flicking past me as if she had seen things she shouldn't. It struck me that there were quiet watchers, people who noticed things but never spoke, their silence keeping the delicate balance of hidden truths intact. That afternoon I felt the first real stirrings of resolve. The world could seem calm and ordinary on the surface, but underneath there were layers that needed careful attention. I returned home, tracing the cracks in the sidewalk with my eyes, the soft hum of the city around me masking the tension I felt. I knew that Claire had her secrets, that Noah had seen what he shouldn't, and that the red coat had been a warning that could not be ignored. Sitting at my kitchen table, I poured tea again, letting the warmth soothe my hands, letting the aroma anchor me to reality. I wrote down notes, small observations, little details that might connect the threads I was beginning to piece together. Every subtle glance, every minor anomaly, every whispered comment from Noah became a clue. I realized then that the neighborhood itself was speaking, its quiet rhythms and unnoticed details giving me insight I had missed before. The danger, the caution, and the secrets were all interwoven into the everyday fabric of life, and I had to pay attention, had to be patient, and had to watch carefully. That day, with the sun low and warm across the street, I understood that being present, truly present, meant more than just being there. It meant seeing, hearing, and understanding the hidden currents beneath ordinary appearances. And I knew, with a certainty that felt like a steady heartbeat, that I would follow those currents, step by careful step, until the truth revealed itself. The red coat, Noah's courage, the whispers, and the quiet signs in the neighborhood were all pieces of a puzzle I was determined to solve. And I would do so with the patience, care, and precision that the situation demanded. A few days later, I received a note slipped under my front door. At first, I thought it was just a misdelivered piece of mail, but when I picked it up, I realized it wasn't ordinary. The paper was slightly crumpled, the handwriting small and careful, and there was a faint scent of pencil and old perfume that made my chest tighten. I unfolded it slowly, my fingers trembling, and read the words, "Grandma, trust your eyes. Watch the garden." My heart skipped a beat. It was Noah. I knew it before I even looked outside, before I saw the tiny footprints on the dew-soaked path that led from our yard toward the corner fence. The boy had been watching, observing, and leaving me a trail without saying a word. I stepped onto the porch, feeling the chill of the morning air against my skin, the wet grass brushing my slippers. Every sound seemed amplified. The faint rustle of leaves, the distant bark of a dog, the soft hum of a car in the distance. My eyes followed the footprints, noticing how they led to the edge of the garden where the ivy climbed high along the fence. There, tucked between two large bushes, I saw a small envelope pinned carefully with a straightened paperclip. I picked it up, my hands barely steady, and opened it. Inside was another message, shorter this time. Claire isn't telling the truth. Watch the mailbox tomorrow. I sank onto the garden bench, the cool wood pressing into my legs as I tried to steady my breathing. Noah had created a small system, a way to communicate without alerting anyone else. It was quiet, clever, and profoundly brave. My mind spun with questions. How long had he been noticing things? How much had he understood? And more importantly, how much danger had been lingering just out of sight? I ran my fingers over the words, feeling the pencil grooves, the small imperfections that only a child's hand could make. Pride and sorrow mixed in equal measure. This child, my grandson, had already carried the weight of vigilance, a responsibility far beyond his age, and he had done it with love and clarity. I glanced back at the red coat hanging silently in the hallway, the symbol of warning that had changed everything. It wasn't just a coat anymore. It was a marker, a signal, a connection between Noah's insight and my need to act. I decided then that I would follow the trail he had laid out, carefully, deliberately, without panic, without rashness. I would watch the mailbox tomorrow. I would observe every small detail, every subtle change in our lives that could reveal hidden intentions. I would honor Noah's courage by taking the steps he had shown me were necessary. And as I folded the envelope back together and placed it safely in my pocket, I felt a quiet determination settle in my chest. The pieces were aligning, the map becoming clear. Noah's secret messages, delivered with care and innocence, had begun to illuminate the path through the shadows. And I knew, with a calm yet heavy certainty, that I would follow it all the way to the truth. No fear, no hesitation, only watchful patience, and the knowledge that my grandson's small voice had changed everything. The next morning, I woke earlier than usual, anticipation twisting in my stomach. I wrapped myself in a thick cardigan, the chill of the early Toledo air brushing my cheeks as I stepped outside. The mailbox sat at the end of the gravel driveway, ordinary and unassuming, but today it felt different, as if it were a silent sentinel holding secrets. I approached slowly, my steps deliberate, every crackle of frost beneath my boots echoing in the quiet street. When I opened the mailbox, I found a small bundle of letters, each one addressed to me but unsigned. My hands trembled slightly as I pulled the top envelope free, noticing the familiar pencil marks that unmistakably belonged to Noah. Inside was a simple message. Look closer at the neighbor's visits. Claire isn't alone in this. I sank back against the mailbox post, the words burning like a quiet alarm in my chest. My mind immediately went to the subtle signs I had noticed in the neighborhood. The cautious glances, the half-smiles that didn't reach eyes, the little interactions that had seemed insignificant before. Every detail now felt loaded with meaning, every movement a potential piece of the puzzle. I realized Noah had been watching, mapping, decoding patterns that I might have overlooked, and his instincts were guiding me toward clarity. I thought about the red coat, the near accident, and the whisper I'd overheard. The puzzle pieces were scattered, but finally I was starting to see the shape of it. I carried the letters back into the house, carefully setting them on the kitchen table, and ran my fingers over the paper as I read and reread the words. I felt a mixture of dread and determination. Whoever had planned to endanger me, whatever Claire's motives truly were, had underestimated the smallest of voices. Noah's courage, so quiet and unassuming, was now my compass. I brewed a cup of tea, letting the warmth anchor me, and watched through the kitchen window as neighbors moved about their morning routines, unaware that I was observing them with a new lens. I noticed a car parked just past the corner, someone unfamiliar, their posture casual, but their eyes scanning. Something about their manner reminded me of the careful whispers I'd heard, the way Claire had moved through the house that morning. Every little detail now mattered. That afternoon, I began cataloging everything: the letters, the drawings, the whispers, the mailbox, the subtle changes in the neighborhood. Each clue was another thread, another layer in the story that Noah had begun to reveal. I realized that the danger was more extensive than I had thought, that the accident, the red coat, and the warning call were only part of a much larger picture. And as I sipped my tea, the quiet steam curling around my hands, I felt a deep sense of resolve settle in me. Noah's small, brave actions had given me the clarity to see beyond fear, to begin piecing together a path that would reveal the truth. I would follow each thread carefully, quietly, and deliberately. The mailbox, once ordinary, had become a signal, a portal into understanding, and I knew that by trusting the messages and my own instincts, I could navigate the shadows that had been hidden in plain sight for far too long. The first steps had been taken, and the quiet journey toward truth and protection had officially begun. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low over the rooftops of Toledo, the soft hum of the neighborhood settling into quiet, there was a knock at my door. My heart jumped, and for a moment I froze, hand hovering in the air. Visitors at this hour were unusual, and after the last few days, nothing felt ordinary. I opened the door slowly and saw a man I didn't immediately recognize. Mid-40s, neatly dressed, calm eyes that studied me with the kind of quiet patience that made me uneasy and curious all at once. "Mrs. Grace Whitman?" he asked, voice measured, courteous, like he was entering carefully into my life. I nodded, unsure whether to invite him in. "My name is Tom Riley," he continued, holding up a badge-like card that identified him as an attorney. "I believe we need to talk about some matters regarding your family." The words sank slowly, heavy and deliberate, and I felt a tight knot form in my chest. I stepped aside, motioning for him to enter, though every instinct screamed caution. Inside, he removed his coat and sat across from me at the kitchen table, folding his hands neatly on the surface. The quiet of the room, the soft tick of the wall clock, and the faint smell of tea and old wood created a strange, tense intimacy. "I don't know much," he began, "but I was asked to look into certain arrangements, family matters that might affect your grandson, Noah, and your interactions with Claire." I felt my throat tighten. "Arrangements? What do you mean?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm, even as my mind raced through the past few days, the call, the drawing, the red coat, the mailbox messages. He glanced down at a folder he had brought, flipping it open carefully. "There are documents, financial decisions, and decisions about guardianship that were made without your knowledge. I believe someone may be trying to manipulate situations to their advantage." I swallowed hard, letting his words settle over me. The calm, careful tone made them even more chilling. I could feel the threads I had been observing, the whispers, the secrets, suddenly connecting to a broader picture I hadn't fully imagined. Noah's instincts had been right. The red coat, the warning, the careful observations, they were all signs of something far more calculated than I had realized. I leaned back in my chair, tracing the rim of my teacup with a finger. My mind spun, cataloging everything I had seen and heard: the trash bin, the whispers, the mailbox, the subtle movements of neighbors, the careful attention of my grandson. And now, this unexpected visitor, calm, deliberate, hinting at hidden manipulations, added a new layer I hadn't anticipated. "I need to gather information, Mrs. Whitman," Tom continued softly. "I can't guarantee immediate answers, but I can help you protect yourself and Noah. and I believe that will make a difference." I nodded slowly, the weight in my chest easing just a fraction. For the first time since that early morning call, I felt a cautious sense of direction forming. I wasn't powerless. I had allies, Noah, my instincts, and now someone who could navigate the legal shadows that Claire seemed determined to keep hidden. The soft hum of the house, the fading light through the window, the quiet confidence of Tom Riley, all of it wrapped around me like a shield. The next morning, I found Noah in the living room, sitting cross-legged on the carpet, a small notebook open before him. He looked up when I entered, his eyes no longer wide with fear but steady, determined, like a little commander planning his next move. I knelt beside him, my heart swelling with a mixture of pride and worry. "Good morning, sweetheart," I said softly. "Are you making more plans?" He nodded, pencil moving quickly across the page. I could see sketches, diagrams, even little notes beside them, details about who came and went from our street, patterns in Claire's comings and goings, observations I might have overlooked. "I'm just keeping track," he said, shrugging as if it were nothing, but I knew it was everything. I studied his work, noticing the precision, the careful attention to small details. Each mark on the page was a clue, a piece of the puzzle that had been building for days, weeks, maybe even longer. Noah had absorbed more than I ever realized, quietly observing, learning, and protecting, and now he was sharing his knowledge in the safest way he knew how. My chest tightened. I wanted to hug him, to tell him how proud I was, but I restrained myself. Instead, I placed my hand over his, letting him feel the warmth and steadiness of my presence. "You've done so well, Noah," I whispered. "I know this isn't easy." He glanced up at me, a small, almost imperceptible smile tugging at his lips. There was a weight in his young eyes, a maturity far beyond his years, but also a glimmer of hope, the kind of hope that comes from having a purpose and understanding its importance. I realized then that he had found a way to reclaim control in a situation that had been frightening and confusing. And in doing so, he had given me strength too, the kind of strength that grows quietly in the chest when someone you love shows courage without fanfare. For the next hour, we sat together, going through his notes, connecting dots, identifying patterns. I asked questions, and he answered in his careful, deliberate way. We spoke softly, almost in whispers, as if the walls themselves were listening. Every observation, every sketch, every line of pencil was a window into what had been hidden, a revelation that brought clarity without exposing vulnerability. By the time I finally suggested a break, the room was filled with a quiet sense of purpose, a calm determination that neither fear nor uncertainty could break. Noah had transformed the tension of the past days into something tangible, something we could act upon. I looked at him, this small, brave boy who had called me that morning in a trembling voice, and I understood that his confidence, his awareness, was a gift. It gave me a plan, a lens through which to see the truth more clearly, and it reminded me that even the smallest voice can carry immense power. And as I watched him tuck his notebook away carefully, I felt a deep, steady assurance settle in me. Together, we would navigate the shadows, follow the clues, and uncover the reality Claire had tried so hard to hide. The red coat, the warnings, the mailbox, and now Noah's quiet, deliberate vigilance. It all led to the same conclusion. We were no longer passive, no longer at the mercy of secrets. We were prepared, quietly, patiently, and with the clarity that comes from love, instinct, and courage. Later that afternoon, I found myself in the kitchen, trying to appear casual as I sipped tea, but my mind was anything but calm. Claire had just returned from a brief errand, the bag in her hand swinging slightly as she moved, and I watched her closely. There was a tension in the air that hadn't been there before, a subtle shift that made every step she took feel deliberate. I cleared my throat softly, letting my voice carry a neutral tone. "Claire, do you have a moment?" She paused, glancing up with a careful smile, almost too quick, too measured. "Of course," she said, setting the bag down with a faint clatter. I gestured toward the counter, and she followed, her posture rigid but polite. I sat slowly, feeling the warmth of the teacup in my hands, letting the silence stretch before speaking. "I wanted to talk about the red coat," I said quietly, watching her face for any hint of reaction. There was a flicker, barely perceptible, of something that resembled unease, and then her smile returned, practiced, calm. "Oh," she said lightly, "I didn't think it was an issue." I took a slow breath, letting the words settle, letting the quiet weight of what I knew hang in the space between us. "It was," I said softly. "Noah tried to warn me, and I realized just how close we came to something very serious. I need you to understand that." Her hands tightened around the edge of the counter, just enough for me to notice. "I understand," she said, voice steady, almost too smooth. I nodded slowly, letting my gaze meet hers evenly. "I'm glad," I said, "because moving forward, there are certain boundaries we need to respect. Noah's safety, my safety, it's not negotiable." For a moment she said nothing. I could feel her measuring my tone, the calm certainty in my voice, the quiet authority that comes not from anger, but from awareness and experience. Then she leaned back slightly, her shoulders relaxing just a fraction. "I see," she said finally. There was no argument, no deflection, only a careful acknowledgement. That silence spoke volumes, more than confrontation ever could. I felt a subtle shift, a recognition that the quiet vigilance I had cultivated, the awareness I had fostered, was enough to make her pause, to make her reconsider. We spoke then of minor details, neutral topics, letting the conversation remain ordinary, while beneath it all, the understanding settled like a weightless thread connecting our awareness. By the time I left the kitchen, I felt a quiet satisfaction. I hadn't raised my voice, hadn't demanded anything, yet a clear line had been drawn. Claire understood. She might not admit it aloud, but the shift in her posture, the careful measured tone, the tiny flickers in her eyes, they all told me that my presence, my knowledge, and Noah's courage had already begun to change the balance. Later, I thought about the red coat, now hanging safely in the hallway, the mailbox letters, the drawings, and the subtle whispers of observation. The morning had been tense, almost unbearable, but it ended in a quiet triumph. I realized that confrontation didn't always need to be loud or dramatic. Sometimes quiet clarity, careful observation, and deliberate calm could be far more powerful. And for the first time in days, I felt the gentle lift of control returning. The sense that the shadows that had threatened my home and my family were slowly beginning to retreat, drawn back by patience, vigilance, and quiet resolve. That evening, I decided to step into the garden, letting the cool Toledo breeze brush against my face, clearing the tension that had been building inside me all day. The air smelled faintly of damp earth and lingering flowers, the familiar sense of home grounding me in the present. I moved slowly along the stone path, my hands brushing over the leaves, feeling the textures beneath my fingers, letting each step be deliberate, mindful. That's when I noticed it. A small envelope tucked carefully beneath the edge of the rosebush near the corner fence. My heart skipped, a familiar thrill running through me. Noah. I knelt to pick it up, feeling the slight weight of the paper in my hand, the way it had been deliberately placed but also protected from prying eyes. Inside was a single line of pencil writing. "Look closer at the shed." I froze for a moment, the words sinking in like stones in water, rippling through my mind with both anxiety and anticipation. The shed. That small, ordinary structure at the far end of the garden that had always been a place for tools, for storage, for nothing of consequence. Until now. I rose slowly, my eyes scanning the yard, noticing details I had ignored before, the slight gap in the fence, the way shadows played along the shed's wooden panels, the faint scent of oil and soil mingling in the air. Each small observation felt like a piece of the larger puzzle, a thread that connected the morning call, Noah's drawing, and the mailbox messages. I approached the shed carefully, listening for any sound, feeling the tension coil like a silent rope around my chest. The door was closed but not locked. I reached out and turned the handle, my fingers steady despite the slow pounding of my heart. Inside, the light was dim, shadows stretching along the wooden walls, and I could see signs of movement, papers scattered across a small workbench, footprints in the dust and something else, a faint glint reflecting from the corner. I stepped closer, feeling the floor creak beneath me, and my eyes settled on a small object half hidden under a stack of old gardening tools. It was a key, simple, ordinary, but significant. I picked it up carefully, running my fingers over the cool metal, the weight of it settling into my palm like a small promise. Noah had noticed this, had seen its importance, and had guided me here without words, only through observation and subtle direction. I realized then that the garden, the shed, the envelope, and the key were not just clues, they were symbols of the vigilance, courage, and connection that had grown between us in the past days. I stood there for a long moment, holding the key, listening to the distant hum of the neighborhood, the faint rustle of leaves, and the quiet heartbeat of my own awareness. And I understood clearly that each careful step, each quiet observation, each message from Noah had been preparing me for this discovery. The small key in my hand was not just metal, it was proof, a tangible link to the hidden truths that had been hovering just out of reach. And in that gentle evening light, I felt a quiet triumph begin to bloom, a recognition that patience, care, and love had revealed what fear alone could not. The path forward was now illuminated, subtle but undeniable, and I knew that I was ready to follow it, carefully, deliberately, until the full picture emerged. That night I sat at the kitchen table with the key in front of me, tracing its edges with a fingertip, feeling the cool metal press against my skin. I had placed the letters, Noah's drawings, and his small notebook beside it, arranging them, in a careful sequence as if by doing so, the threads would finally weave into clarity. The house was quiet except for the occasional creak of the old floorboards and the soft hum of the refrigerator. I let my mind replay everything. The call at 5 a.m., Noah's trembling voice, the red coat, the messages tucked into the mailbox, Claire's subtle unease during our kitchen conversation, and now this key hidden in the shed. Each detail carried weight, each moment a piece of the puzzle I was determined to solve. I realized that patience had been my greatest ally. By observing, by listening, by letting Noah's small but sharp instincts guide me, I was beginning to see the bigger picture, a map of intentions, secrets, and subtle manipulations that had gone unnoticed for too long. I picked up Noah's notebook and ran my eyes over his sketches and notes again. The patterns he had recorded made perfect sense now, connections between people, movements, and moments that, at first glance, seemed ordinary but were, in fact, anything but. I felt a quiet swell of gratitude for his bravery and clarity. I realized then that the red coat, the trembling call, and the hidden messages were not just warnings. They were pieces of a careful strategy, a way to prepare me for the revelations that were about to unfold. I could feel the tension in my chest ease slightly, replaced by a sense of control that had been absent in the chaos of fear. I took a deep breath, letting it fill my lungs, and exhaled slowly, imagining the threads of danger and secrecy stretching before me like a map laid out across the table. Each line, each clue, each observation was a step closer to understanding and to reclaiming the safety that had been threatened. I glanced at the key again, thinking of the shed, of the small envelope, of Noah's guidance, and I knew that it would unlock more than just a physical door. It would reveal the truth hidden behind layers of deception and quiet manipulation. I sipped my tea, letting its warmth soothe the tension in my shoulders, and allowed myself a moment to appreciate the precision of what had been happening. A child's courage, a grandmother's vigilance, and the careful unfolding of events that had guided us to this point. And as the night deepened, I felt a quiet satisfaction, a soft acknowledgement that the pieces were finally starting to come together. I knew that in the coming days, each step I took, each observation I made, and each small act of patience would lead me to the answers I needed. The puzzle was becoming clear, and the quiet strength I had cultivated, through fear, caution, and love, was now ready to carry me forward. The house, once heavy with tension and uncertainty, now felt like a space where clarity was beginning to bloom. And in that stillness, I understood that the careful, deliberate approach, the quiet vigilance, and Noah's insights had prepared me for what was coming next. I was ready. That night, sleep eluded me. I lay in bed, listening to the soft rhythm of the house settling, the faint creak of floorboards, as if they carried secrets of their own. My mind kept replaying the events of the past days, the early call from Noah, the red coat, the mailbox messages, Claire's subtle reactions, and the key hidden in the shed. Each thread pulled at the others, weaving a pattern I was only beginning to understand. Unable to rest, I rose quietly, careful not to wake Noah, and made my way to the living room. The moonlight spilled through the curtains, casting silvered shadows across the furniture, highlighting ordinary things in extraordinary ways. I sat at the table, placing the key before me, along with the notebook and letters, letting the silence stretch around me. And then I noticed something I had missed before, a faint smudge on one of Noah's sketches, almost imperceptible, a pencil mark that suggested movement, a connection between Claire and a figure at the corner of the street. My heartbeat quickened, a slow thrum of clarity and apprehension. I traced the lines carefully, letting my eyes follow the subtle clues. It was a map, an unspoken story of movements and intentions, something Claire had hoped would remain invisible. And suddenly, it all clicked. The hidden glances in the neighborhood, the subtle shifts in Claire's behavior, the careful surveillance that Noah had unwittingly captured, and the warnings she had tried to obscure. The red coat, Noah's courage, and my careful observations were no longer isolated pieces. They were part of a larger truth that had been hiding in plain sight. I felt a mix of shock and profound sadness. How long had this been orchestrated? How much of our lives had been manipulated quietly, without our awareness? And yet, beneath that sorrow, there was a rising sense of power, a recognition that I now held knowledge that others had hoped to keep from me. I leaned back, letting the key warm in my palm, feeling its weight anchor me. It was more than a tool. It was a symbol of vigilance, patience, and revelation. I realized that fear, while sharp and immediate, had taught me patience. Uncertainty had honed my observation, and love had guided every careful decision, every gentle step I had taken to protect Noah. The moonlight seemed brighter then, casting clarity over the room, illuminating not only the key and the notes, but the path ahead. I knew that the truth would not be revealed in haste, nor through confrontation or anger. It would unfold quietly, deliberately, like the turning of a slow, inevitable tide. And in that stillness, I made a silent promise to follow every thread, uncover every hidden detail, and ensure that Noah and I would emerge unscathed with the balance restored. The midnight hour had given me something I had not anticipated, a profound clarity. The danger was no longer abstract, the threats no longer shadows. They had form, names, and faces. And now, armed with observation, evidence, and the quiet courage of my grandson, I could step forward into the coming days with the patience and resolve that would allow truth, justice, and calm to prevail. The following morning, I awoke with a sense of purpose, the clarity from the midnight revelations settling like a calm tide in my mind. I made my way to the kitchen, the sunlight spilling across the worn linoleum, warming the tea I had brewed for myself. Noah was already up, notebook in hand, and when our eyes met, I saw the same determination mirrored in his young gaze. I knew then that we were aligned, not just by love, but by understanding, by the knowledge of what had been hidden from us. I began to organize everything I had gathered, letters, sketches, the key, and subtle notes from observations in the neighborhood. Each item was a piece of a plan, a puzzle that had taken days to assemble. I realized the importance of patience, of waiting, watching, letting the pieces fall into place before taking any direct action. Noah watched quietly, occasionally pointing out details I might have missed, a figure lingering too long, a movement repeated, a glance exchanged. His perspective, so small yet so precise, filled gaps I could not see on my own. I felt a quiet swell of pride, mixed with a careful restraint. I knew that any misstep could alert Claire, but I also understood that time and discretion were our allies. The red coat, once a symbol of warning, now became a marker of presence, a reminder of vigilance and readiness. I rehearsed in my mind how to approach the next steps, how to observe without confrontation, how to gather evidence without suspicion, how to maintain the calm veneer of ordinary life while quietly reclaiming control. Each movement, each gesture, had to be deliberate. Later, as I tended the garden, I noticed small changes. The angle of a car parked too long on the street, a shadow moving behind curtains, the faint sound of voices softened by distance. Every detail mattered. I made mental notes, cataloging, connecting, and preparing. Noah joined me in the garden, crouching to examine a cluster of flowers while subtly scanning the yard, his small figure focused yet composed. We worked in silence, our communication wordless but profound, a shared understanding that each observation, each careful note, would bring us closer to truth. By the afternoon, I felt the quiet satisfaction of strategy forming, of control returning to hands that had felt powerless days before. I realized then that revenge, if it could even be called that, would not be loud or vengeful. It would be quiet, poetic, deliberate, a reflection of clarity, patience, and justice without anger. Claire would see the consequences of her actions not through confrontation, but through the slow, inevitable unfolding of the truth. And as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the yard, I felt a deep, steady calm settle in my chest. The danger was still present, the thread still delicate, but now we held knowledge, foresight, and patience. Noah and I were ready. The strategy was in place, the path ahead clear, and the quiet power of awareness had become our shield. The days to come would reveal the final pieces, and I knew that when they did, the balance would be restored, not with noise or anger, but with the steady certainty that only careful observation, love, and patience could bring. The days that followed were slow, deliberate, each one carrying a tension I could feel deep in my chest. I moved through the house and yard with quiet awareness, every step measured, every glance catalogued, every sound noted. Noah followed, notebook in hand, alert but calm, his small figure a reminder of the courage that had sparked all of this. Claire moved through the house as usual, but I could see subtle cracks in her composure. Hesitations, careful phrasing, quickened glances that told me she knew the balance of power was shifting. I watched and waited, noting her movements, connecting them to the patterns Noah had meticulously documented. Every small act, every whispered exchange, every minor inconsistency became part of the larger picture I had been piecing together for weeks. Then, one afternoon, I noticed something unusual in the mailbox. A stack of papers, slightly disheveled, caught my eye. I retrieved them carefully, and as I unfolded each one, the pattern became clear. Claire's actions, her decisions, her subtle manipulations, they were all documented, all traceable, and all leading to the consequences that would soon be revealed. I felt a quiet satisfaction settle over me, a calm acknowledgement that patience, observation, and love had prepared me for this moment. Noah peered over my shoulder, eyes wide with understanding, and I nodded, giving him a small, approving smile. Together we began organizing the evidence, connecting threads, and preparing for the final steps. There was no anger in my movements, no rush, only a careful, deliberate preparation that would ensure the truth was revealed without confrontation, without drama, only with quiet, undeniable clarity. Later that evening, I arranged a small meeting with Tom Riley, the attorney who had become a steady presence in our lives. We reviewed each detail, each subtle clue, and confirmed the steps that would allow the balance to shift without chaos. I felt a deep sense of empowerment settle in me, a steady, quiet strength that came from knowledge, preparation, and patience. By the time the house fell silent, the shadows stretching long across the walls, I knew the final pieces were in place. The warnings, the calls, the mailbox messages, the key in the shed, Noah's drawings, they had all led to this moment. And in that stillness, I allowed myself a brief smile, feeling the satisfaction of quiet justice, the poetic balance that would soon manifest. I looked over at Noah, tucked into his bed, and whispered softly, "We did it, sweetheart." We kept watch, we waited, and now the truth will speak for itself. The house felt calm, the tension replaced by anticipation, and I realized that the journey had prepared me for this exact moment. The final pieces were in place, and the quiet, deliberate resolution was within reach. The weight of fear, of uncertainty, and of hidden manipulation had lifted, replaced by clarity, patience, and the undeniable power of careful observation and love. Everything was ready. The morning sunlight streamed through the living room window, soft and golden, carrying with it the calm I had been waiting for. Today, everything would fall into place, not with noise or confrontation, but with the quiet inevitability of truth. I moved through the house slowly, letting my eyes rest on familiar objects, the red coat still hanging in the hallway, the mailbox empty and still, the garden neat and undisturbed. Each item was a reminder of the steps we had taken, the vigilance we had maintained, and the patience that had guided every action. Noah sat at the kitchen table, his small hands folded, eyes bright with anticipation. I placed the key gently beside him, the metal cool beneath our fingertips, a symbol of what had been hidden and what was now revealed. Tom Riley had already arrived, papers in hand, a quiet reassurance of the order that was about to be restored. Claire appeared soon after, her composure intact, but I noticed the subtle tremor in her hands, the careful attention to her tone as she spoke. There was no confrontation, only the soft clarity of consequences. As the steps unfolded, I watched her reaction, measured, deliberate, and I realized that the quiet, poetic justice I had envisioned was finally taking shape. Evidence, observation, and patience had done their work. Claire could no longer hide behind manipulation or subtle deception. The letters, the sketches, Noah's careful notes, and the key from the shed all converged into a clear, undeniable record. I felt a wave of calm satisfaction settle over me. This was not vengeance born from anger. It was the triumph of awareness, courage, and love. I could see it in Claire's acknowledgement, in the careful arrangement of truth, in the steady presence of Noah, who had guided me unknowingly every step of the way. By midday, the final details were confirmed. The household, once fraught with tension and secrecy, now rested under the quiet certainty of clarity. I poured myself a cup of tea, letting its warmth settle into my chest, and allowed myself to breathe fully for the first time in weeks. Noah came over and placed a small drawing beside my cup, a little red coat, carefully sketched, with a tiny heart beside it. I smiled, feeling a mix of pride and relief, knowing that this child's courage had been the catalyst for the resolution. Later, I stepped out into the garden, the cool breeze brushing my face, and looked over the yard, the shed, and the quiet street beyond. Every small action we had taken, every subtle observation, had culminated in this moment of peaceful triumph. The danger had passed, the shadows lifted, and the balance restored. And as I stood there, breathing in the scents of earth and flowers, feeling the warmth of the sun, I understood something profound. Strength is quiet, patience is powerful, and love, true love, reveals paths through darkness that fear alone cannot navigate. I returned to the house and sat by the window, watching Noah play quietly with his toys, the ordinary rhythm of life unfolding around us. And in that simple, peaceful moment, I allowed myself to feel the full weight of what we had accomplished. The house was safe, our family intact, and the lessons of vigilance, patience, and courage imprinted in our hearts. Thank you for listening to my story. Sometimes silence teaches more than words. Don't forget to subscribe and share your own story in the comments. Maybe your voice will be next on Her Voice.